Well, good morning and happy spring, I think. It feels like we're still waiting. I'm desperately waiting for that weather to come in. You know, the time of renewal is supposed to be in the air, right? The buds are supposed to be coming out at any moment. We're supposed to be, this is our time when we're coming out of our cocoons, and we've seen this obviously in other parts of the world where folks are getting together and kind of doing a little bit of introspection and moving forward. In Rome, they just happen to have white smoke that comes up to let you know that they are done with their process. In Washington, the two parties are sitting down now in meeting rooms a lot like this and over email, and then as we saw the other day in a 100-page document where they are basically doing their own soul searching about what's next for their party. And obviously a lot of the focus has been on the Republicans since they've had a rough few elections, including the most recent one. And for those of you who watched the press coverage yesterday, the head of the RNC, which I think is pretty unprecedented, basically came out with a document that laid out in pretty stark detail the problems that the party faces and admitted to their shortcomings and what they need to do next. And it's understandable that there is a great deal of frustration right now among Republicans. I mean, for the last six elections, Republicans have lost a popular vote 5 times. And that's not so much fun. In the last 6 elections, Democrats have won 300 or more electoral votes. In the last 6 elections, the Democratic nominee for president, whether that candidate won or lost, has carried 17 states plus a District of Columbia, every single one of those elections. Right? If you add all those states up, add the electoral votes up, that comes down to 242 electoral votes, or 89.6% of the total you need to win the Electoral College. All right, so from the very beginning, that's where the map starts for Democrats, at least today, with those 17 states plus DC. Now, Republicans have won 13 states in every single election since 1992, and they're really lovely states, like, you know, Idaho and Wyoming and South Dakota and North Dakota. They just lack one thing, which is people. And when you don't have a whole lot of people, you don't get a whole lot of electoral votes. So you add up the 13 states that they have total in every election, and that adds up to 102 electoral votes, or only 38%. So you can see that Republicans are already starting off behind the 8 ball, even before the campaign begins, if you just look historically. But the one issue that the Republican Party really is focusing on right now, and it's very important to them, is demography. And that was the issue that really determined this last election in many ways. I mean, there were a whole lot of issues that were at play, but the weight of the demographic wave that crashed upon Mitt Romney and Republicans was pretty overwhelming, and it's not getting any better. Certainly not for Republicans. You know, when I was talking to the Romney campaign, and they would say this throughout the process, they were determined that this election was going to look just like 1980. That in 1980 you had a first-term Democratic president who was struggling mightily to get the economy under control. You had high unemployment. You had a frustrated electorate, and they believed that just like 1980, that wave of frustration was going to take out a one-term, it was going to make a one-term president of a sitting Democratic incumbent. But there was something else that was going on in 1980 that looked very different from today, and the demography is a big piece of that. So in 1980, 89% of the electorate was white. Fast forward to 2012, 72% of the electorate is white. So even though Mitt Romney actually won a bigger percentage of the white vote than Ronald Reagan did, it didn't matter because the biggest thing that changed, of course, was the percentage of the electorate that was minority. 11% back in 1980, 26% now, and that number continues to grow. And it's not just that he lost the minority vote. Mitt Romney got absolutely crushed. He lost Hispanics by 44%. He lost Asian voters by 47%. He lost African Americans by 87 points. That is an unbelievable drubbing. And when you look even at other groups, women, right? Back in 1980, women and men were evenly divided, 50-50. The percentage of people, 50% of the electorate was women, 50% were men. Since 1984, majority of voters in presidential elections are women. Last year it was 53% of the electorate. And Mitt Romney lost women voters by 11 points. Ronald Reagan lost women voters too, but only by 2 points. And then you look at younger voters, that 18 to 29-year-old demographic we hear so much about. It was a bigger percentage of the electorate in 1980, and Ronald Reagan barely lost that group of voters. 1 point he lost them by. Mitt Romney lost them by 23 points. So Republicans at the national level know exactly where their problem is. Do they have the exact solution? Not necessarily, but they know what they need to do next. And they believe, as you have heard a lot about, that immigration reform and changing the tone in the way that they talk about it is one way to make the case to Hispanic voters to actually come over and vote for a Republican. The problem, however, is when you get to the congressional level. And so while national leaders know that they need to change their tone and they need to change their focus, congressional Republicans actually are looking at a very, very different landscape. And this is the landscape we're looking at when we go into 2014 and the midterm elections. So while the country has gotten more diverse, the average Republican congressional district has actually gotten wider. And that is thanks in part to redistricting, which happened in the last election. That's thanks in part to self-selection and the fact that minority younger voters are concentrated more heavily than Republican voters. So you see them in and around urban areas much more than in some of the exurban and rural areas that are more Republican. The average Republican district now is 75% white, and the average Democratic district is 51% white. This was work done by my colleague, David Wasserman. So if you're a Republican up for re-election in 2014, and you hear all this talk about Republicans looking forward to 2016, about demographic challenges, your district doesn't look anything like the challenge that faces Republicans at the national level. So getting something through the House and getting them to focus on this issue is going to be a very different challenge for Republicans than what they need to do at the national level. And when you look at the states that are up in the Senate, all right, the ones that are on the line in this next election, Democrats have a lot of exposure. All right, they have 21 seats up to just 14 up for Republicans. And where Democrats have to defend their seats are not in the kind of battleground swing states where this demographic change is happening. They're going to have to defend seats in places like West Virginia and Alaska and Arkansas and South Dakota. So this whole debate about demography is not going to get played out in those states. It's going to get played out in 2016 in places like Colorado and Nevada and Virginia, but that's not where we're going to see a lot of activity in 2014. And it's not that Democrats are without their own challenges either. Remember, as I said, this coalition, this younger, more diverse coalition that the president put together is, again, in a presidential year, you can turn them out. Doesn't matter where they live. It's the total state vote that matters. But in congressional districts, they're just too concentrated. They're not spread out as much, which means there are not many places or opportunities for Democrats to go to find seats to pick up in the House. There just are very few vulnerable districts left. In fact, if you look at what's happened since 2006, we had a wave election in 2006 that brought Democrats into the majority. 2008, you added more Democrats. 2010 wiped out Democrats from the majority, put Republicans in. Democrats gained a handful of seats in this last election. So things are pretty well sorted out now. 96% of Democrats sit in seats that President Obama carried. 94% of Republicans sit in seats that Mitt Romney carried. There just aren't that many easy targets left. The low-hanging fruit has been eaten. All right, so that's what you're looking at when you look at the 2014 agenda. The bigger problem, I think, for Democrats going forward, especially in 2016, is what will the next Democratic candidate for president be able to do with that coalition that President Obama put together? He was incredibly successful at targeting and turning out that vote. And we know a lot of it had to do with the technology, a lot of it had to do with the infrastructure, the amount of money and energy that went into finding those voters. I talked with the person on the Obama campaign who was responsible for doing a lot of the digital work and a lot of the targeting using their digital tools. And one thing he told me, which was remarkable, you know, those young voters, those 18 to 29-year-olds, obviously were a very important part of their coalition. And they were tough to find, though. You guys know this. 18 to 29-year-olds, they don't have landlines. They use their cell phones for everything. Finding those cell phone numbers are tough. But what they did and how they were able to find them was through Facebook. In fact, they said that they found 87% of the targets they needed to, you know, the people they needed to target through Facebook. So that's the kind of ingenuity that the Obama campaign put forward. It's unclear if the next candidate's going to have that same capacity. And more important, are they going to be able to turn out voters in the way that the Obama campaign did? It's not just about making sure that you get Hispanics and Asian Americans and younger voters to turn out for you. They have to turn out at a very, very high rate. And in fact, this president won thanks in part to just that incredible concentration of the vote. If you look at just the county data, how many counties this president won? He won fewer counties than any modern president has ever won. In fact, he won fewer counties than Michael Dukakis carried, okay? He won because he drove up the vote in some of these very urban areas, like Cuyahoga County in Ohio, like Broward County, Fort Lauderdale in Florida, like Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Those are the places where Democrats and whoever the next Democratic nominee is going to be are going to have to continue to put that effort. So we're going to have to watch and see if that president can do that. The governor's races are another place we're going to be spending a lot of time and attention, and this is where I know for you all too, a lot of action is taking place. It's also the place where Republicans are hoping to find their next presidential candidate, and as they hope their next presidential, maybe the next president. For the, just for the breakdown, Republicans have to defend 24 seats, Democrats have 14 seats, so there are many more Republicans in danger, and of those 24, 14, is that right, 11, 12? Yeah, 14 of them sit in states that the president carried. All right, so 14 out of those 24. Those are going to be seats that Democrats are obviously going to spend a lot of time and energy and money going after. And many of these people who are up are the names on the short list for 2016. Susana Martinez in New Mexico, Brian Sandoval in Nevada. Obviously this year up in New Jersey is Chris Christie, John Kasich in Ohio. There we go. People from Ohio, you will know that. I know we have a candidate now getting in the mix there, Democratic candidate. It's still very early on, so these races have yet to really sort of gel. But those are the places where we're going to see a lot of action. And at the end of the day, you know, look, midterm elections are very different from presidential elections. We know traditionally, again, after everything I just talked about with demography, we know traditionally that midterm elections have a lower turnout among those minority groups. Midterm electorates are usually older, they're usually whiter, And look, I'm a glass half full kind of person. I believe love can change things. I believe that, like, it's important to hug people. But as a candidate, I don't want huggers. I want fighters, and I want angry people. Because angry people vote. And people who are in love with you don't necessarily come out and vote for you. And that is the bigger challenge then in a midterm election, is how many people are going to be motivated, fired up, angry by what they're seeing. We know, of course, that what's happening in Washington is getting everybody pretty angry, right? Voters across the board say they're just disgusted with Washington. And that alone could make for a different kind of election. You know, this is a second midterm election for this president. Traditionally, that's a very tough time to be the party in power, to be the party in the White House. Going back since the end of World War II, every single time, there have been 6 of these midterm elections, second-term midterm elections, and every single time but one, the president's party has lost seats, all right? And the one mitigating factor here that could prevent Democrats from losing more seats would be that one, the frustration level with Washington so high that it is, you know, it's sort of like a pox on both your houses, I'm so angry with everybody here, we're gonna throw all the bums out. So Republican incumbents just as vulnerable as Democrats. That's one piece of it. The other piece of good news for Democrats is they didn't do so great in 2012. They didn't pick up that many seats, so they don't have many to lose. That's a good sort of silver lining. Yeah, we didn't win so much, but now we can't lose so many. That is the other thing probably at their benefit. And as I said, it's pretty well sorted out now. There just aren't that many vulnerable incumbents left. So that leaves what's looking like right now probably a pretty status quo kind of election. The Senate certainly is vulnerable for Democrats because they have so many of these red seats up. It would mean that Republicans would need to run the table. They need to get 6 seats to take control of the Senate. There definitely are 6 vulnerable seats out there. The question is whether Republicans will get the right candidates. That's why you're hearing a lot in Republican circles right now about finding better candidates than some of the ones they had in years past. They don't want Christine O'Donnell, though she was a lot of fun for us in the media, doing the I'm not a witch ad, still one of my favorite ads of all time. They don't want to see Todd Aiken anymore, Richard Murdoch in Indiana. Those guys are like, you know, we don't want any more of those people, say Republicans. Let's make sure none of them make it through the process. But you can't really control that. You think you can get in and make some change. It's very hard to influence the process from the outside. So that's certainly something we'll be paying a lot of attention to. It's still very early, but that's where the playing field is at this moment. So look out for a lot of action in your states, where the governor's races will be taking very high priority, and look for an election that, at one hand, could be sort of a status quo, or we could see that finally the frustration with a dysfunctional Washington bubbles over, and we see sort of an anti-incumbent election like we haven't seen in quite some time. And with that, I will leave you to your next speaker, and I hope you have a wonderful time in Washington. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.